there were scholars, people who were really starting to do a lot of research. Tim Mark-Bly, Philip Troy came out with their syllabus. There were other books like Alexander Saxton, The Indispensable Enemy. There were some real landmark books, A Long Time California, oral histories of Chinese farm workers, early laborers. But one of the books that I always look to as a good reference of the development of the community was a book called Sam Fao. Now, most of you know what Dai Fao is, right? I Fao, Dai Fao, is that San Francisco? Ni Fao is Sacramento, right? Well, there were two Sam Fao, two third cities. There was a northern third city, which was Marysville, and a southern one called Stockton. And our speaker came out with a book called Sam Fao, and that was the one that I read cover to cover and learned a great deal about the development of our early Chinatowns. Many like Fresno, Salinas, Sacramento, and so on. So I think that she did a great case study of the Stockton Chinatown. So what I'm going to do is I'll let Sylvia Sun-Minnick introduce herself and a little bit more, and lead you into the topic discussion for tonight. Would you please welcome Sylvia Sun-Minnick.
Thank you, Gordon. Lights on or off?
Guys, is it okay?
I have to remember, I'm right-handed, so I have to hold this left-handed. And my husband's going to give me this look. I'm sitting right here, it might screw up. It's really, really good to be here. I appreciate the Chinese Historical Society. I too have been a member of your society for a number of years. Have to be, because we're all Chinese and we're all interested in our heritage. Tonight I'm going to tell you a story, but I want you to focus on the time period of the 1920s, and you could see what has happened to California. This is Thomas Fu Chu. He was born in Long Kai, East Toisang, in 1889. 888. You know how Chinese that is. His parents brought him over to America when he was 10 years old. So he arrived here in 1898. His father had invested in a cannery called Presida. It was on the corner of Sampson and Broadway in San Francisco, and they concentrated on tomatoes. So what's a tomato? You can can a tomato, tomato sauce, tomato puree. You can do a number of things with tomatoes. However, going back to Tom Foon, the only son, rather than coming to San Francisco, the parents moved him to Los Gatos, which is south of San Jose. And it's because the parents put him there, you would notice that he went to school with a multitude of other children. Most of the children were from farmers, they were immigrants, and they were the ones that actually, many of them helped them in Tom Foon's later years. Tom Foon is the one in the middle, cross-legged, next to a Caucasian, Sayan. Tom Foon stayed in Los Gatos, San Jose, learned the area, and by 1906, he was 18 years old. His father's cannery was demolished. In fact, everything in Chinatown was demolished. So Tom Foon realized that his life had changed and he had become a man. So with that, we see him here on the far left, very dapper, to me kind of good looking. What he did was he went to his best friend, Amadeus Petros Giannini, better known as A.P. Giannini of the Bank of Italy. A.P. at that time was lending money to immigrants to restart their businesses again. With A.P.'s advice, what he did was he went with his father to look for land, and they landed up in El Viso, which is at the end of the South Bay. Meanwhile, there's another family, Li Yufun. The gentleman in the middle, he came in California in 1869, and he started a shoe and slipper factory on the corner of Washington and Stockton Street, across from the Methodist Church. Mr. Lee had 4 girls and 2 boys, and eventually he kept on adopting so many that eventually he said he had 16 children. You know how tight, you adopt this one and you adopt that one? That was the system in those days. Well, here are the Li Fu family. The one on the far right standing is Li Gum-ching, daughter number 3. She was 16 years old during the time of the earthquake. She was born in Oakland. So were all her sisters and all her brothers. They're all American citizens. Li Gum-ching had bound feet. So did sister number 1 and number 2. Number 4 got away with it. She didn't have to have her feet bound. But can you imagine this 16-year-old running downhill from Chinatown to the ferry building during the earthquake in bound feet, trying to catch a ferry to Oakland? She told me this. She's my grandmother. At any rate, there was a marriage between Tom Foon and Li Gum-ching. And very quickly, the couple was extremely busy. For her, the first child was Charlie. Charlie was born in 1908. Good luck, it's a boy. Followed by Lonnie in 1908, 1911, and then Tidy, 1913, and then Henry, 1915, and then Francis, 1919, Ethel, 1922, and then finally Timmy, 1924. So Li Gum-ching was extremely busy. Can you tell? And this was all in Los Gatos. Charlie, and then the footsteps going all the way down to Timmy. Meanwhile, Thomas Foon was himself very busy. By the time Timmy was born, he had 3 canneries. The canneries were in El Viso. You could see San Jose down the bottom, and you move an inch up, and you see El Viso. What's this? Oh, well, told you he's going to orchestrate. And then there was Mayfield. And then up on top in Iowton is you follow from Oakland to Rio Vista. And that's the other. Oh man, I don't know how to work this. All right. Okay, so he's teaching me while we learn. So those were the canneries. The one in El Viso, which is at the confluence of the Guadalupe River and Coyote Creek. It was known as a place that had flooding. Well, the land was cheap, so of course there are problems geographically. Would you believe, 2017, it flooded again, that town, exactly in El Viso. Remember the big floods we had here back in February and March? That one was really pretty much devastated. But it was very good to learn that the Bayside Cannery, which is no longer Precita, but now called Bayside, they created a town of itself. There was the cold storage, all this area, hold on to it, was all of the Bayside material. And men had cabins there. The Chinese built all their own canneries. They didn't hire a contractor. There was no such thing as hiring contractors. So the employees built it, and one of the things that they did to stress was the lateral and horizontal trusses, just to save it from earthquakes. It was so important to them after the San Francisco earthquake. This is the first one, El Viso, which is the Bayside Cannery. I noticed that they had security guards here too, watching what was going on. The El Viso Cannery canned tomatoes, starting with a 40 horsepower boiler. And then the second one was in 1980, was the Mayfield near Palo Alto. The Mayfield Cannery, Tom Foon had paid $200,000 to buy 4 acres of land. And it was between the railroad and the highway, the El Camino Real. The reason I understood that they wanted to buy this acreage of land was because there were a lot of women, Portuguese, Italian, a tremendous amount of Mexicans, and the women were the good workers they needed for working in the cannery. For instance, when they first started, they had, in October, they started in July, cutting peaches, and pears. And what happened was that they were so swamped, the women were being paid $3 a day. And by October, the tomatoes came in, and they were so swamped that they were willing to pay $4.75 a day. In addition to that, they had built 19 cabins for the men to live in. And I'll tell you about how they got the women to work there in a little while. Meanwhile, that was 1918, 1919, they built another cannery in Ileton, near Sacramento. The Ileton one, on the Sacramento River, had 10 acres of land that Tom Foon bought. And in that 10 acres, he built a cannery, warehouse, cabins, apartments, bunkhouses that accommodated 500 people. He had his own little village there. The asparagus really grew in that area very, very well as spinach. The other ones in the South Bay, like San Jose, there were cherries and all that farm area. He did tomatoes, peaches, pears, plums. Purportedly made the first fruit cocktails that they canned. While he hired a lot of different nationalities of the women, it seemed that he had always made sure that the foremen and supervisors were people from the Toisan village. And they were the ones that headed most of the canneries. One of them was the Chews. Of course, he's Thomas Foon Chew, but he trusts the Chews so much that this was 3 brothers were the Chews, and other Chews came along afterwards. I call them the Bayside Loafers, as you can tell. But they were really the backbone behind the companies. You know, there was the sorting, women in production, and the labels. it was not only just Bayside asparagus, but he had Bohemian and he had Snow Peak. We know this from the other canneries that we have today. Now, Tom Foon's cannery was considered the third largest in California, following Del Monte and Libby. So he was pretty much up there in the competition. There's the production, the stock. I love this picture because they believed in the products. They were driving Model A's and what's the other model? Model T, but this model was the one that they used on the floorboard, and they built wooden benches that bolted to the ground, and they would go around picking up the women workers at certain stations. It was like a bus system that they had. So they get to the cannery, they unbolt the benches, and they use the rest of it for transportation in carrying the produce and the products. Pretty hefty stuff that they carried. They also, in Ileton, had what we called a tugboat. The tugboat's name was Progress. And with the tugboat, they pulled barges full of products through the Carquinez Strait down to South San Francisco to the South Bay, and then transport them on rail to be shipped out. Sometimes they did use the Delta King for transportation elsewhere. And, I love this. This is Jimmy Chu. Actually, much of my research came from Jimmy. Later on, stayed with the company and retired in Stockton and Sacramento. If you see me waving something around, I've got a gnat who wants to be close to me. I think it's a LA gnat. At any rate, that was Jimmy. But look at the way they dressed. Jimmy said that Grandpa insisted that he wore a tie to work because Grandpa wore ties to work. I have never seen Tom Foon's picture anywhere, and I researched hard. I never saw him wearing those Chinese garb, like the gowns that the Chinese wore. He was so Americanized that he thought that way. He read that way. And he became able to connect with other communities because of his Western outreach. Here's some pictures of the employees. That is Bayside in El Viso. That is the Mayfield one in 1918 with all the female workers. Now, I couldn't find one with Ileton with the female workers, but I did find this one with all the males, particularly the office staff. In most of these pictures, you're going to see a lot of children. Like, as I said, in Ileton, he created a community of 500. A lot of children were always taking pictures with their parents. There is Tom Foon right here. This is Charlie, oldest son. I think he was trying to teach Charlie the business. His office staff. There's Tom Foon. This is son number 2, Henry. And he got down to earth with all his employees. And he was really well liked. He also developed, besides the cannery business, a Tom Foon Ranch and Land Company, which meant that he would go and talk to farmers and lease land from him or else buy land from him. For instance, he leased 750 acres of peaches from Tudor, California, 250 acres of tomatoes from Hollister and Gilroy. Asparagus came from the Ironton area, the Delta area. He had rice in the Yolo County, Los Banos, Dos Palos, and even in, it's called Dai Chou Hang in Chinese, but it's Grass Valley. And he did these pairs of green gauge plums, you know, the one that's shaped like a little heart. You folks know that one? Okay. All I remember was my grandmother was saying Dai Chou Hang, and I kept on saying, I don't know where Dai Chou Hang is, until I finally found out that it was Grass Valley. The same way that, you know, the Chinese had a different words for different towns. Some of you might know Mokolu. Anybody know Mokolu? Well, that's what they called Walnut Grove. So that's how far we've come. Tom Foon had a farmer foreman named Mr. Ito. Mr. Ito, Japanese, was an ideal farmer. Tom Foon loves to read. He loves to know about the latest technology, and he would try different things. One day he was telling Mr. Ito, I know how to plant asparagus. Mr. Ito said, I'll tell you what, I will let you set aside 10 acres of asparagus, and you let me grow the rest, my way. Sure enough, Tom Foon tried different types of irrigation, and guess what? Harvest time came, Tom Foon's 10 acres was total failure. But Mr. Ito's went very well. In addition to Mr. Ito trying to stop Tom Foon from being the farmer that he thought he was, he also told Tom Foon, you have to stop working so hard. You have to stop drinking so hard. You have to stop cavorting too hard. Otherwise, you're going to die young. Spoken like a typical older person. I had the privilege of meeting Mr. Ito when he retired in Sacramento, and he was in his 90s. So that was the foresight of him looking at what farmers think. For some of us women and men, we talk about acreage. So there was 250 acres, 20,000 acres. What are we talking about? 1 acre equals 12 basketball courts. For those that want to put it into perspective. Or 9/10 of a football field. So if you have a mile, it's 620 acres. So 1 acre is 12 basketball courts, 250 acres of tomato becomes 3,000 basketball courts. So if you keep those in perspective, you would know how much land is. Here, nowadays, the younger generation don't know, and even in the cities, as Eugene was talking, you keep looking at land, and people are building on land. It doesn't even come close to what happens up the Delta area. And all the San Jose area when we had cherry trees and fruit trees and asparagus fields. Tom Foon was not only being a farmer, he was also a member of the community. This is Long Gong Kung Saw. That was his Say Sing family associations. Lao Guan Zhong, the 4 families. He was a major contributor there, not only there, but into other like Sacramento and different communities. He also was a member of the Chukakumso, the Chu Family Association, and always contributed. He had invested in the Chinese Times as one of the original leaders, the Kamsan Sipo. He was an investment into Ningyo, the Chinese cemetery out in Colma for the Toisan people, one of the early founders of it. And he was also a Mason. He was a lodge number 10, the first Chinese Mason who later became a Scottish Rite member and a Shriner. And while the Masons do not brag about what they do, and they're not that that's not forthright. They don't talk about their charity work or any cordial work. But I was trying to figure out, okay, he's a Mason, what does that mean? So I asked a close friend from Florida, and he did this quote for me. It says, "The aim of Masonry is to make a good man better, and by their association with other Masons, to help them become an integral, valued participant within the community. Masonry is not exclusive to any race, ethnicity, or religious belief. It appears that Tom Fu Chu embodied the highest qualities of Masonry," and that I truly, truly believe. This is a picture of Tom Fu's family in 1927, and his mom lived with them after his father passed away, not too long after the San Francisco earthquake. So this is a picture of Li Gangqing. Tom does associate with not only the Chinese, but the Caucasians, and he believed in having a good time. And there's one of the sons. This picture was taken at Camp Richardson in Lake Tahoe. Guess what? Tom Fu passed away. February 1931. We have to know that he died very shortly after getting pneumonia. This is in February. Because Chinese New Year was there, they had to postpone his funeral for 2 more weeks. And the funeral was at the 1044 Stockton Street, then called the, Native Sons, right, Munson?
Yeah.
It was called,
Well, actually, no, in 31, they were already called the Chinese Americans.
okay, CACS. And that was where the funeral was held. There is a lady sitting in the audience right now who was at this funeral. Would you believe? You want to stand up? She was there, and she was 10 years old, right, Margie? Isn't it something that this has continued? This is 1931. And she remembers it as being huge. So did a lot of other people. So they said that there were 1,000 cars in the procession. There were 200 Scottish Rite members, the mayors of San Jose, Ileton, San Francisco, the city manager of San Jose, the State Chamber of Commerce president, the U.S. appraiser of customs, the U.S. District Attorney, the Vice President of Bank of America, the Consul General, the police chief, and this one I couldn't figure out, I really couldn't. The coroner was there. And I said, what part did he play? Anyway, the coroner was there, the police chief, the Chamber of Commerce, 3 Superior Court judges, and the list goes on. And there were a lot of Chinese ones. That's the east-west of who was who. So immediately after that, obviously, we have to understand, I want to take you back. October 1929. Everybody remember what happened? Stock market crashed. And as it crashed from east to west, it takes a little while, 18 months or so. So, unfortunately, if you take the stock market crash, grandfather Tom Foon was fairly well extended in his land holding and his canning industry. In addition, this is the time of February where it's cold and foggy and miserable, and he did imbibe a little bit, so he caught pneumonia. I truly believe those were the reasons that he passed away. The pressure, the stress, and everything else. So what happened to his companies and his holdings? Well, of course, the canneries went into receiverships. Ileton were given, sent into receivership. The first person to be the receiver was Andrew Fields. Andrew Fields took it over when Grandpa died in 1931. Andrew Fields died in 1932, also at age 41. The next receiver, Joe Hartman, died in 1933, also age 41. Now, if that isn't kind of a, coincidence, I don't know. What happened to Li Gangcheng? Because in those days, the probate courts were entirely different from today. Li Gangcheng was given $200 a month to care for 6 children under 18, the youngest being 7, and her mother-in-law. So the next year she went in 1933 to raise it to 400, and the judge said he could not because it was not under the probate law, and so she received nothing. Finally, when all the dust settled, what did she get? She got $10,000, raising all those. Oh, here's a picture of Tom Foon up there in Mingyao. If you ever want to go up there, his children are buried around there. This is what Grandma got. Their old apartment building has $10,000 for herself, her children, and her mother-in-law. And this is 1122 Powell Street. For those that know San Francisco, it's across the street from the library. And actually that's where my first 7 years was spent with Grandma. So 25 years later, what do we see? This is Li Gangcheng and her children, some of them, and the first round of grandchildren. That is how she looked when I first met her. She died in 1977. And this is the result of the Tom Foon legacy, the grandchildren. What happened to the canneries? The Alviso one is part of the historic landmark register. As a historian, I have good and bad things about it. The city of San Jose annexed Alviso, and try to make sure that the Tom Foon legacy continues. But because it's on the historic register, I call this historic arrest. Can't do anything with it. No one has the money to fix it. No one wants to touch it because it's supposed to be so sacred. And it's called, it's arrested decay. But this is the remains in Ireton, another issue. It's now all torn down. The Mayfield one, in Palo Alto, had gone through several changes. The last I know is that it is housing a Fry's electronics store. When San Jose annexed Alviso, they did put up some bronze placards. This one indicated where China Camp was, and that one indicated the cannery. And of course, there is one for Tom Foon Chu himself. And this is off of Zanker Road. If you ever decide to drive on 237, going from either Milpitas to San Jose, there's a turnoff that you can see his placard and the Tom Foon Chu Way. In many ways, what I'm bringing to you is a feeling that there were Chinese entrepreneurs in the 20s who had mixed, not just Chinese, but mixed with all the larger communities. They suffered the same economic downfall as during the Depression, just like everybody else. And really, think of what they had done, because all this was prior to the Golden Gate Bridge and the Bay Bridge. So the commuting was a lot worse, but they seemed to have put it all together. And with that, I'm willing to entertain any question. Does anybody have any? Yes, sir.
Okay, some of us know Urban Lay, and he was from Locke, and his mother actually was, she was like a manager in a canning factory that was just, across the highway. No, it wasn't an island. It's right next to Locke.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of wondering, were they competitors or whatnot? Because they did asparagus, they did peaches, I'm not sure what other ones. But
It was National Cannery and a couple of others. What they did, actually, was, no, they did not compete. They created a consortium. Grandfather was a Chu. My grandmother was a Lee. And the National Cannery was owned by a Lee family. So because grandma was a Lee, grandfather had to put money into that cannery too, as a consortium. And Larry Hing also had a cannery in Oakland. And so they each had a little bit of investment in each other's.
I happen to know the one in Locke, they pretty much just hired Chinese. Asians. There were a few Japanese. During the 30s. After that, it opened up a lot.
True. No, it's really true. Any other questions? Monson.
Did I hear you say that he had a relationship with A.P. Giannini? Could you,
He had a relationship with A.P. Giannini and that helped him get started in financing. Do you know any more details about that? It's very interesting.
Well,
This goes back then to the 1907 period.
Okay, AP started his business, opening his bank, not by sitting in a building. He went to farmers and went into their kitchens and talked the farmers into investing in his bank. That was AP's style of doing things. Tom Foon learned that same thing when he went to the farmers to sign them up for the leasing their fruit and such. I do know that the relationship with AP went beyond Tom Foon's death, because the family has always had an underlying relationship with Bank of America. My Aunt Frances was the
Sure.
assistant manager there. I think, you know, and Auntie Dolly, for Dolly G. So the family has always had that relationship. AP himself had lived in Alviso, and he's the one that recommended that they buy the land to build a Bayside cannery.
How did they build their relationship? Because don't forget, it's a time of exclusion. And the Italians and the Chinese in San Francisco didn't always get along. So how did AP and Tom Food make that bridge? That's what I was trying to get at. Do you know?
I don't know.
Anything?
No, but I would think that in time of crisis, Tom Foon got the loan from AP. AP was smart enough that he was lending money to whoever wanted to buy.
Anybody, but that's an
Anybody.
important point. Yeah, that's true in San Francisco.
Okay, this is in time of crisis. No one's going to separate whatever, you know. It's sort of like there is a restaurant in Locke called Outer Walk. Okay, how did Outer Walk, this Italian fisherman, land up in Locke? You know that story.
I don't know how it got there.
Oh, it was because the Italian fisherman rescued some Chinese fishermen. It's documented in Jim Matlow and Gillenkert's book, Jeff Gillenkert's book. It's new material that they just found out. And so when the Italians started looking around for places to settle, they remembered that this Italian fisherman rescued the Chinese, so they invited him to stay forever. That's how Outer Walk happened. So, you know, there is a lot of friendship that happens, and it's not because they stay by themselves. I think my theory is the further out you go, the greater your pool of friends and relations become.
That's good, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate your presentation. Very interesting. I'd like to ask you, I'd like to ask you, Sylvia, after the 30-year cycle and everything just collapsed, of course, it was depression years during the 30s and the 40s, and you showed a shot of the grandmother with the children, 57. My question is, her 4 boys and girls, how did they pick themselves up after 31? Did any of them go into business or are them go to college? I just wonder what the second generation pattern is to start all over again. So that's my question. Did they go to college or just business?
Yes. Yes, they did go to college. Okay. Uncle Charlie, number one son.
That's right.
He went to Bellarmine in San Jose, but then he went into a career, I'm slurring my words because he became a gambler. And then he owned a casino in Reno. So I call him a businessman, but I'm slurring it just to show what happened to him. And he was spoiled because he was the only son. Daughter number 1, which is number 2 child, she brags about the fact that Olivia de Havilland and Joan Fontaine, they were sisters, were going to school with my mom. My mom then went into married my father, and my father went into the diplomatic corps and became consul general in San Francisco. Daughter number 3 passed away at a young age, working for the Chinese consulate. Daughter number 4 went to college and worked at Bank of America. The youngest daughter served as a waif. She went into the military service in World War II, graduated from UCLA. Tim, the youngest, graduated from UC Berkeley, became a banker. I forgot Henry. Henry also went to college, but he became a Caltrans engineer in Reading. So I think it's through Grandma who really made sure that the children pushed forward as much as they could. And then in my generation, all of us have graduated from college, all the cousins, which is a lot of inspiration from Grandma. But I think the wherewithal came from Grandpa. Anybody else?
I don't know. What, was, I can talk loud. All right, was he a member of Chinese American Citizens Alliance? Because you said that he invested in Chinese Times, and the Chinese Times was owned by CAC.
That's right. And my answer to that is, I asked Munson.
I think we're still looking. We had one of the things we're focused on, but we could maybe do that if it was actually mentioned, or actually reading the actual historical archive minutes now, which are in Chinese.
CACS, it would be in there, wouldn't it?
It probably would be somewhere or in the membership documents. We don't know. I cannot verify that for you right now. The fact that he actually had his service in the hall there as well, usually the first priority is those that were brothers.
That's a good answer. Thanks for asking, because that puts him on the spot to look for there.
Thanks a lot.
I can make a comment.
You know, I've been by the cannery, and it's sort of, like you said, it's sort of sad to see an empty building unused. And so do you have any contact at all with the city of San Jose as to some future development plans?
Actually, it would not be with the city of San Jose. It would actually be with the historic district. It's National Register, and so it would be, state will handle it for the feds, and they would. But to tell you the truth, I think the Office of Historic Preservation doesn't want to do anything, because this is not the only example of arrested decay. There are many others of, I'm digging state parks, I'm sorry.
That's fair.
I do have a question, because I think historic preservation really, guys, has its role with the food, especially if you can think in terms of taking the historic building and doing what we call adaptive reuse, not arrested decay. So I would wonder if perhaps the arrested decay question doesn't come up because it's simply a local blockage, either by county or a local city. Do you know anything of that? Typically, the National Register landmark is pretty liberal. You're not limited the way they are, especially, I'm sure that canneries never got any funding from the federal government.
Right.
So don't get the wrong impression in terms of the significance of national historic preservation.
All I know is that while it's still there, there's a chain link fence around the whole property.
That's still below local. If there's a condemnation process going on, Eugene could tell you a lot about that, because we've got another project like that out in Rancho Cucamonga.
Yes. Did you have a question?
I'd just like to make a comment that Tom Foon paid his workers really well,
Yes.
really well, because $4 a day in about 1918.
1918, yes.
Because in the late 1950s, I was a farm worker and I made $6 a day, so compared to somebody in 1918 getting $4.
But also remember, though, that he provided them room and board and salary. So were so devoted to him that it was phenomenal. I mean, they really, really were devoted. Yes.
Well, since he makes so much money, didn't he put some aside? I mean, did he lose everything, or, I mean, he had 30 years of building up a business, and asparagus, I guess, is a premium product, so, you know, you said it was the king, so he made a lot of money. Did he put some aside?
No, you know what I think happens? We're not as conservative as we are today. He wouldn't put any money aside because you believe in expansion, and you have to put money in the expansion more than you would conserve the money. He couldn't. He figured as long as his wife and his children are taken care of, as they put food on the table, he did what he did save went also into investment in Hong Kong and in China, in Toisan. So, but he never expected a return for those things. So if that's considered investment, you know, and put money aside. But the family never got that. It's just one of those situations. What I see it as, this was a time of the Carnegies, this is a time of the Fords, this is a time of the Ziegfelds, this is a time where a lot of people were spending a lot of happy money. So, it's unfortunate.
Oh, anyway, hello. Is it working? Anyway, my name is Jeff Chan, as you may know, but anybody here actually work in a cannery? You know what canneries are, right? Anybody work here? Oh, great. See,
I work in a cannery.
I worked at a cannery when I came out of high school.
There's no jobs available. You know, those days,
Hello. Those days,
looking for a job was hard to come by. This microphone ain't gonna be down.
excuse me,
But anyway, I work in the Gerber baby food
cannery by Stanley Andrew at Oakland border.
The cannery right there, the Gerber baby food, and all the Chinese.
Oh,
This means your powerful voice.
thank you, sweetie. Well, Jamaica. But anyway, I keep it nice and short, but I came out of high school looking for a job, and there are very few jobs available, right? You don't, it's 1953, so anyway, a lot of the Chinese guys, I don't know about the girls, but the Chinese guys, they would work for Del Monte or Gerber Baby Food. And right away, you had to join the union. The moment you walk through the door, you join the union, and they get their cut. And those union guys are all Italian. Does that make sense? Right? But anyway, the pay wasn't too bad. But the thing is, they got Chinese working in one area only, unloading the freight car, unloading cans out of the freight cars, and putting the cans and bottles on the line. They wouldn't let the Chinese guys in any other department. They keep them all in one place. That's showing what it was back in those days. But anyway, that was a tough time anyway. But anyway, it was a job. I had it for a couple of years, and that was it. Thank you. Anyway, I love to visit the Iota, Susu, Sacramento stuff. You know, that's where all the beautiful women were. Everyone, and the local girls okay, but we love to drive here, drive there, and check them out. And they can't wait for us to show up. How about that one? Right? Anybody did that? Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for having me. May I introduce you to my husband? Stand up, honey. Oh, his name is Wellman Chin from Alhambra. He moved to Stockton about 8 years ago. He remembers Jeff.
Okay, any other questions? Let's give another round of applause. It's very informative, and, you know, it's great that you can connect yourself to a part of California history in this way. You know, we're all the more enriched because of this knowledge of this history, these connections. Oh, yeah, and Sylvia brought a few books to sign, so if you'd like to pick up just the most recent book, okay. And Never a Burnt Bridge, okay. And by the way, Sylvia is modest, but she's also had a career in political life in Stockton. She served on the city council. That wasn't always a positive episode, but she'll tell you how rough it can be in political life. So anyway, well, thank you, Sylvia, and I appreciate. I do have a couple of more quick announcements here. I forgot. Oh, by the way, and so earlier I couldn't remember Joan Rudder Ward's name, and she came all the way from asperigas. So thank you for driving in. And then Michael Kwan in the back came all the way in from Santa Barbara. So we have some very loyal members who come out. I do have a couple of upcoming events to announce. On April 8th, which is just coming up this weekend, from 9 to 12, right here at Castellar School, is Bunny Fun Day. So maybe most of us are past having kids who are Easter egg hunt age, but maybe we have grandkids or nieces or nephews. Easter egg hunt, games, activities, and prizes, $15 admission fee, $2 and under for free. But it's a benefit day for the kids, for Castellar Elementary School, and for families with children from China, and for the benefit of Miss Elder Chinatown 2017. So it's a fundraiser. So, you know, I wouldn't myself compete with the kids for the ace, but you know, the $15 admission fee would be well worth it. I also forgot to mention that this coming Saturday, the board of directors actually postponed its board meeting so that some of us could go out to Santa Monica Beach and see a kite and go to the kite flying day in honor of Tyrus Wong. The Otis College of Art and Design, from which Tyrus, our late Tyrus, was a alumnus, is organizing this 6th annual kite festival, and they're honoring Tyrus Wong. There are free kites and admission, and everyone will receive a free, unique kite along with color theory instruction. So Otis College students will provide advice and assistance. This is from 11 to 4, Saturday, April 8th, in the beach just north of the Santa Monica Pier. You can park in the parking lots right nearby. So this is an announcement that I didn't forget to mention. You know, and we miss Tyrus, and we're going to go out and honor him. But you know, there's one of Tyrus's peers is still around, and that's Milton Kwan, and I see Cheryl over here. So you know, we saw your dad, and he looks like he's still going strong. So you know, we really appreciate his being around. Some of you may know that Milton taught at Trade Tech as well as being a commercial artist. And one of his landmark designs, the signpost for the Grandview Gardens restaurant. You know, the Grandview Gardens restaurant building is long gone, but you might notice that there is the two signs on either end, one on Hill Street and one inside the plaza, with the little swords that are mounted on top of the long poles. That's one of Milton's designs. And also, I'm happy to say that in our own kitchen, we have a couple of watercolors from your dad. So anyway, we're really honored that he's still around. So hopefully we'll see him here and there. And any questions for the good of the order? So Sylvia will be in the back, signing her books, and please feel free to stop by. We thank, as always, Winifred Liu for organizing our refreshments. Thank you, Winnie. And and of course, there's a little donation cup, and feel free to contribute to it. Anyway, some of us will probably go out and have a snack. So after this, some of us didn't have dinner. So how about Phoenix Inn? Okay. So after, if anybody's interested, we'll gather at Phoenix Inn at the corner of Orb and New High Street. Okay. Thanks. Have a good evening.